In this video, let's begin identifying and going over the most common things to be aware of that slow down your site. And by the way, if you're a programmer and if you've been dealing with these sorts of things, some of this may be a little basic for you, but if you've never tried to optimize your site before, if you've never really written CSS or JavaScript or dealt with web design, this should be all new for you. So pay attention really closely because some of it is a little technical and it might be confusing. I hope it won't be.
This video is brought to you by EpiPies Academy.
So the first thing to understand is that every browser follows a certain critical rendering path to render your page. And what it does, it builds this thing called the DOM, Document Object Model. It's a fancy word. It's a fancy acronym. Don't get too intimidated by it. All that this means, I'm going to put it in very simple terms for you. All that the critical rendering path and the DOM, all that this stuff means is that your browser parses the HTML that your page has, and it looks for certain things like scripts and images and all the things that are in your page, and somehow parses it into things that your browser can then use to display the page. Okay, that's all it is. And there's a certain path. The critical rendering path is there's a certain path to doing it, and it usually, if you read the HTML from top to bottom, that's really the path. With some examples, because sometimes the HTML needs to call styling files that have your styling designs, or it has to call JavaScript files or something like that, and those are they block the rendering. So CSS is basically cascading style sheets. This is what gives your page the look and feel. The important thing about them is that CSS files are usually externally referenced, and they block DOM construction. So what that means is your page literally when your page encounters a CSS file that it has to externally reference, it literally waits until that CSS file is fetched, and only then it can resume displaying, creating the DOM for your page. And your page only gets displayed when the DOM is created. The same thing with JavaScript. If your browser encounters a call to a JavaScript file, then it makes that call and waits until the JavaScript is fetched and then processed, and then your DOM construction can remove. So you see that if you have a lot of external CSS calls, JavaScript calls, all these things can slow down your browser. If you just have a few such calls, they're pretty quick, but they can add up. They can add up because they block one another. They have to wait for one to come back to, it's not something that is usually done simultaneously. There are possibilities for this, and we're going to talk about later in the course, but as a default, they have to wait for one another. And that's the important point to take away for you, is that they slow each other down. They depend on each other. So they can cause a lot of bottlenecks. Additionally, things that slow down your site are large images. So if you have like beautiful images, it might take a lot of time for your browser to download. So a small image that's compressed might take milliseconds to download, which is not something that you would feel when you're as a user. But if it's a beautiful large image, then it might take a few seconds to download because it just takes a lot of space. And that might slow down your site. So if you have a lot of these or any kind of rich content, like many high resolution images or videos or frames within your page or other rich content, that really slows down your site. So that's also something that's pretty easy to examine and identify, and you can fix that right away as well. So some of these are very low hanging fruit, and we'll get to all the low hanging fruit. So like within a day, let's say within the first 24 hours or within your 8 hours of full work on this, which is to say your first day, you can really create a lot of fixes and speed up your site quite a bit. And that's exactly what we're going to end up doing in this course. The last thing I want to bring your attention to is just if you have large pages. All pages these days online, they have images, they have videos, or at least some, they have CSS, they have JavaScript, or at least some combination of them. So you can't get rid of all these things. But what you can do is get rid of many of the unnecessary ones, and make sure that a lot of these are totally needed by your page, because sometimes they are causing more slowdown than the benefit that they bring to your users. So a page with a lot of text is not a problem, because text is very fast to download and it doesn't block rendering. But if you have a lot of other elements that take longer to download, block DOM construction, which is to say block rendering, then you have a lot of slowdowns that are not necessarily hard to fix. That's the beautiful thing about it. So that's what we're going to get into in this course. Now, after this video, it should be clear what are the typical worst offending issues are, and also what the low-hanging fruit is to fix, because a lot of these issues are not that hard to fix. Some, for example, JavaScript optimization issues, they're complex and they really need advanced programming. But we're not going to get there in this course. We're just going to go for the low-hanging fruit. That's like the 80-20 rule, which is we're going to tackle the 20% of the worst offending things that are easiest to fix, but they're going to get you 80% of the way there very quickly. And of course, on an ongoing basis, you do want to optimize further, but you want to get a lot of results quickly. And that's what we're going to start doing in this course. So let's get right to it with the next videos.